All right, everyone, what is up? My name is Mechanical and welcome back to the channel for drumroll. I mean, I just did it in my head before I said it, so I fucked it up already. But hey, we're back for more Warhammer. I've been missing it. I have been missing it, and I think you guys have too. So we are going to be looking at someone new today. It has been recommended tenfold. His name, WesHammer. Aye. You thought right. The name of the video probably gave it away as well, but hey. So we are going to be diving into what do the orcs think of every other faction. We've gone through all of like the 40k timeline explained, and yes, I can always do with a reminder of what the fuck is happening in this universe, but at the same point I was also just like, nah, let's look at something different, and we like the boys, so let's have a wee look and go for it. Right. I haven't actually watched any kind of WesHammer video yet, so I'm kind of interested to see his style and see what it's all about.
According to recent polling data that I just made up, there isn't a single 40k fan in existence that doesn't love the Orks. If they say they don't, they're either lying or they hate fun. And if that's you, who hurt you?
I've liked what I've heard so far.
As a franchise is how bleak, dark, and comically serious it often takes itself. But right when it's all starting to feel a little too depressing, the Orks come in like a giant green wrecking ball, ready to inject some much-needed humor into the grimdark future. And what's not to love about these guys? They're a bunch of cockney football hooligans. They don't care about taking territory, they're not trying to build some grand empire.
Heard that one before as well, actually.
Claude, I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked.
It's time to go!
The only thing the Orks care about is fighting, and in their pursuit of getting into ever more crazy scraps, they've spread to every corner of the galaxy in order to give all of the other factions a, quote, proper kicking. But what do the Orks think of all those other factions? Do they think they're a bunch of weaklings and cowards, or do they have a lot of admiration for groups that can hold their own in a fight? Do they look at a species like, say, the Tau, who specialize in ranged warfare, as a bunch of cowards, or do they appreciate their taste in Daka? What are their thoughts on factions like the Necrons, the Eldar, the Tyranids, Chaos, or the Imperium?
Damn, he speaks really
Which ones
fast.
do they like fighting against the most? And dare I say it, have any of them actually managed to earn the Orcs' respect? What about some of the gods
I guess we'll find out.
universe, like Khorne or the Emperor? Do they respect them as avatars of war, or think they're a bunch of wimps waiting to get pasted by Gork and Mork? We're gonna get into all that and a whole lot more in this video, as I had nothing to do but research this one for the last week after catching COVID at a Magic the Gathering event, which I know is an obvious thing to say now that I'm saying it out loud. It's like saying I caught the plague when I visited Nurgle's garden. It's like, what was I thinking? So yeah, sorry if I sound a little bit off in this one. I'm still kind of getting over it. But anyways, before we dive headfirst into the Grimdark, a quick shout out to this video's sponsor.
Well, okay, already great start, but man, does he talk fast, so I'm gonna have to like pay attention. We've got the football hooligans again. Like, that's just, we all know that's gonna be fucking chaos, right? And the fact that they're not trying to build their own empire for the greater good or the Lord Emperor, it is a nice contrast to it all, for sure. And yeah, I think that's why maybe everyone, as he said, is really quite like, let me hear more about them orcs. Let me hear more about them orcs. And yeah, he's got lots of energy. I love his bandana. Damn, he looks cool. So yeah. WesHammer, let's go. Let's learn about the fucking orcs and what they think of everyone. I'm actually really interested to see what's gonna happen here.
This video is sponsored by Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus, a fast-paced and exciting turn-based tactical strategy game set in the grimdark future.
Is it a mobile game?
The big news this month is that Tacticus is celebrating their 2-year anniversary. Not only do they have a ton of exclusive content lined up,
wow, he must be pretty huge if he's getting sponsored by like Warhammer games.
New playable faction,
that's like the dream.
Ninth Legion, the Sons of Sanguinius, the Blood Angels, are finally being added to the game. Starting on August 4th, you'll be able to unlock the first Blood Angels champion, the Jump Pack Intercessor Sergeant Matt Teneo, by participating in the weekly events. And then, starting on August 21st, there's going to be a 7-day legendary champion release event for the Lord of
This
Death
video came out a
himself,
long time
the
ago,
fifth
so
Orc,
don't
Chief
be
Librarian
pressing
of
on
the
anything
Blood
if
Ages,
it's
and one of the most powerful
if it's
space
out of
marines to
date.
have ever
All right.
lived. My favorite thing about Tacticus is just how much there is to do. There's a ton of different game modes, including guild raids, multiple faction-specific campaigns, PvP arena battles, constant special events, and over 70
I've never
legendary
gotten
Warhammer
into
40,000
mobile
champions to
games
collect and
myself,
battle
mainly
with, from
because
16 playable factions,
I
with
game
new
enough.
ones being
I
added
don't
all the time.
I don't
With the
need to
2-year
then have
anniversary event
the
about to
worry
kick off,
of
there's never been a
having it
better
on
time
my
to either
phone
come
as
back
well.
to Tacticus or start
Just no.
playing for the first
Just
time.
no.
Click on my link in the
Don't do it
description
to me,
of this video
WesHammer.
to download and play the game
Don't
for free
be
today.
tempting me.
A huge thank you to Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus for being such a long-time sponsor of this channel. I
Nice.
probably don't need to tell you this, but Warhammer 40K can get pretty dark. The Milky Way galaxy of the 41st millennium is one where hatred and loathing have been allowed to fester and spread unchecked through the minds and hearts of nearly every spacefaring species. When we try to measure how they all feel about each other, it's ultimately an exercise in splitting hairs
cool.
over who they each hate the most. But right at the moment we're about to give up hope that anybody could be having a good time in the grimdark future, we're introduced to everyone's favorite
love these like
boys,
3D images
the
that I'm
Orks,
looking
a
at
bunch
right
of
now.
fighting-obsessed Cockney hooligans who rampage across the galaxy looking for a good scrap to get stuck in. If you know anything about 40K, I don't need to tell you just how amazing and hilarious they are, even if the people
I'm new,
in the
mate.
universe
Please explain.
absolutely hate them. They're like a hurricane of violence that carves a bloody path across the stars and kills anyone that gets in their way. But from our perspective, they seem to have a pretty good sense of humor about the whole thing. And their passion for
They're
fighting
Cockney
is
football
pretty damn
supporters.
infectious.
Good
The funny thing
banner
about
awaits.
Orks is that all of the fighting they do isn't motivated by hatred for their enemies like most other species. In fact, hate is kind of a foreign emotion to the Orks. They have no concept of what it's like to hate something. Now sure, there's things they don't like much or maybe find annoying, but
So they
have
hate?
a simple and elegant
Well, they just want to
solution
fight
for
all the
that.
time?
They just
Interesting.
fight those things, which is what they love to do and thus what they assume everybody else in the universe loves as well.
So it's, for me, when he's like, oh, they don't have hatred, like that's kind of a weird thing for me to actually listen to. Because, you know, when you think of like insane violence and war, it's driven via a difference in opinion, a hatred, all these negative stuff. And then the fact that they don't even have that as an emotion. Huh? Interesting. Very.
And speaking of fighting, it's pretty much the only thing that the Orks care about. You gotta remember,
They just care about
they
fighting.
were created
Cool.
60 million years ago by the Old Ones as living weapons to fight against the
Oh yeah, with the
Necrons.
Eldar, right?
Every single aspect of them, all the way down to their genetics, was designed for combat. Fighting isn't just something they enjoy, it's everything to them. It is a
Kinda scary
biological
looking.
need, in much the same way that food or drink is for us. Because of this, the lens that the Orks view their galactic neighbors through is almost always framed by how good of a scrap they can give the boys. Now, what the Orks actually think about all of the other species they routinely go up against is admittedly one of those topics that isn't nearly as fleshed out as it could be. Insight into Ork philosophy used to be pretty rare until we started getting all of the Mike Brooks Ork novels that were written from their
Big Daka.
perspective. So Brutal Cunning, War Boss, and Big Daka, as well as a bunch of short stories and the Ork codexes, are going to serve as the primary sources for all of the information in this video. And because this script was made using sources almost exclusively written from their perspective, I'm going to do honor to the Orks and use all of their preferred names for different factions. Now, I'll explain them as we go, but real quick, humans are known as Humies, Space Marines are Beakies, all Eldar are Scrawnies or Pansies in the older lore, and their Dark Eldar variant is known as the Spikies. Tau are Fishheads or Fish Boys, Tyranids are Bug Eyes, Necrons, and pretty much all robots for that matter, are known as Tin Heads, Tin Boys, the Tins, or the Tinnies. Chaos Space Marines are the Chaos Lads with the Spikes, and my personal favorite, Demons are known as, quote, Chaos Griblies. We're going to kick things off with their thoughts on Humies.
Incredible.
By far, there's more information about their feelings on them.
Those names should
any
just be
other
put in the
faction.
dictionary.
And
End of.
by examining how they view our species, we get a good framework of Orky values that we can use to understand their relationship with Chaos and other Xenos.
Okay. Humies.
You may be surprised to hear this, but the Orks are not particularly renowned for being especially deep thinkers. A fun fact, one of the things that starts to happen to them as they grow bigger from surviving a ton of battles is that their brains start growing as well. and also start thinking a whole bunch more.
Oh, I was gonna ask,
something that the orcs
are they
find
intelligent?
particularly annoying. Since the vast majority of them will get killed before they ever reach what we would consider smart, it shouldn't come as a surprise that they don't really take the time to observe all of the different nuances between Humi factions. The Sisters of Battle, the Astra Militarum, the Imperial Navy, it doesn't matter. They're all just Humis to the orcs. This extends to even factions that we as the audience would consider so radically different that they're almost a different species entirely, like the cyborg tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, or even the friggin' Gene Stealer cults. The former is just the Humi equivalent of mech boys to the orcs, and the latter is a bunch of funny looking Humis with too many arms. There is, of course, one major exception to this rule, and that's the Space Marines, or the Beakies, as the orcs call them, due to the fact that the Mark VI Corvus pattern power armor looks kinda like a bird. The other most common variant of Space Marine armor has a faceplate that the orcs think looks like an orc when he's straining too hard at the drops, which is their word for a latrine. Now that obviously doesn't make for a good nickname, so no matter what armor they're in, all Space Marines are Beakies, but we'll get into their thoughts on Space Marines later in this video. In multiple scenes throughout the Orc novels by Mike Brooks and many codexes and campaign supplements from the last few decades, we get some direct quotes from the Orcs that give us a lot more insight into their views here. From their perspective, Humis are kind of weird. They're fun to fight for reasons that we'll get into shortly, but culturally, they just do a lot of things that don't make any sense. Like, for example, one of the Orcs' favorite pastimes other than fighting is looting. And when they end up stealing a Humi vehicle, their excitement of getting their hands on some new wheels is almost always soured by what they find inside. You see, Humis have this really annoying habit of putting all of their flashy buttons and lights on the inside of their vehicles, which, as every good orc knows, flashy gubbins are meant to go on the outside to show off to all the other boys. At least Humi vehicles normally have a good old-fashioned set of wheels or tracks that they ride around on, which is something that the orcs respect. But unfortunately, this isn't always the case. When they fight against the Admech, for example, or the Red Robes as they call them, their tanks float around like the vehicles of the Scrawnies, the Fishheads, the Tin Boys, and the Spikies. Now, some orcs believe this is why the Red Robes are so soft. If your ride isn't constantly being bombarded with bumps and shocks strong enough to compress your spine, you'll never be proper hard. Another thing that perplexes them about Humis and their trucks is that they
real man
drive
stuff.
on these big lines in the dirt called roads or bridges or some other stupid Humi word. They don't understand why they don't just drive wherever they want like the orcs do. Likewise, they have this hilariously weird habit of
why do we have
putting wheels
roads?
on the
Like,
doors
why?
inside of their ships and gargants, which, as every orc knows, you can't drive a door. But Humis just ain't logical. Humis also have this weird invention called an alarm system that's only purpose seems to be to get all of the Humis all riled up and scared before a fight. Why they would invent something like this is completely beyond them. Every self-respecting orc knows that before you get stuck in, you and the lads have to amp yourself up with some hooting, hollering, and a nice loud wah at the top of your lungs. Not
literally like they're just going on a night
feelings
out,
of
but it's
fear
just
and
all
dread in
fighting.
you and all of your mates. Why they would make something like this, let alone put it on all of their buildings that contain all of their best loot, is something that continues to vex the orcs to this day. Humis also love wasting time building things that don't seem to have any practical application, like libraries, schools.
Are the boys right? Are the boys right about us?
Named the God Emperor.
I feel seen.
Beings of logic like the orcs would never build anything that wasn't specifically going to be used in a fight. Weapons, armor, and even some of the weird mech boy inventions all have a
well, I guess if they're not
but
interested in
Humis,
like art,
90% of what
anything
they
like
made
that,
was
then why would they
practically
agree with all
worthless. At
this?
least when it came to their buildings, the Humis knew to make them real big. Now, that was something that the orcs respected. It made it more fun to knock
Bigger
them
is
over.
better.
Now, although Humi cathedrals are a bit much for the orcs, all of the statues depicting the Emperor is something that they can at least wrap their minds around. Although they've never seen him, considering that he's normally depicted as being 100 feet tall with a giant flaming sword, he's clearly either the boss of all the Humis or their god. Either way, it would make sense to them that he told all of the smaller Humis to build all these things, and they have to listen to him because, again, he's the boss. Now, don't get it twisted.
So is the orcs having like a boss themselves?
Stand up to true and proper gods like Gork and Mork. But so far as they can tell, if they ever manage to make it all the way to Terra and break into the Golden Throne, they're gonna get to fight a 100-foot tall Humi. So that's something that all of the orcs are looking forward to. Now it makes
His face
sense
looks
to
so
the orcs that the
excited.
Emperor is in charge because based on all of the artwork they've seen, he's the biggest. This is how the orcs do things. The biggest orc is the boss. Not just because he's stronger than all of the other boys, but because orcs get bigger the more fights they get in. So a proper big orc has a whole bunch of experience and thus makes for a better leader. But aside from the Emperor and the Beakies, all of the other Humies are the same size. So they're always arguing with each other about who's in charge. This is something the boys just don't really understand, and thus Humie hierarchy of command is still an enigma to them. What they think they should do is just fight it all out and figure out who's the biggest and strongest and make them the boss. But you gotta remember that Humies just ain't logical.
Quite a few things
they do
probably
things that don't make sense, and oftentimes it's better just not to think about it. Also, in their defense, Humies are pink or brown, fragile and soft, not tough and green like the boys.
Tough and green.
As Uthak pointed out in Brutal Cunning, they die a lot easier as well. If all of the Humies started fighting each other, they'd all just be dead, and then there would be no Humies for the orcs to crump. They're too weak for that kind of thing. And since they clearly want to keep fighting the orcs, they assume that the Humies have had to make a few sacrifices in this department for the greater good of fighting. Now, Humies have a lot of faults, don't get it twisted. They do a lot of weird stuff that just doesn't make any sense, and they waste an enormous amount of time not fighting when they could spend time fighting. But even after all that, the orcs absolutely love them, even if they would never admit it out loud or even understand their affinity for them. And that's for two major reasons. One, even though they're not as good at fighting as the orcs, there's a lot of Humies. Now, we as the audience know that the orcs outnumber the Humies some 1,000 to 1, since they reproduce so quickly. But the orcs don't know this. From their perspective, it looks like Humies are everywhere. They can be found in every corner of the galaxy. And no matter how much time they spend fighting them, there's always more Humies. Every time you kill one, 10 more show up to take their place. And honestly, you couldn't ask for a better trait to have in an enemy. And two, although admittedly inferior to orc technology, the tech that Humies make is easily a close second, especially when compared to the strange, esoteric machines utilized by other Xeno species. Humie weapons and armor are powerful, efficient, reliable, and most importantly, they look like what they're supposed to be. A gun looks like a gun, a sword looks like a sword, a tank looks like a tank. Now compare that to all of the stuff used by the Spikies and the Scrawnies. Their weapons are dainty little things that no self-respecting orc would ever be caught dead wielding. Now the only real issue that orcs have with Humie gear is that, quite frankly, it's boring. Humies are always unoriginal, and as a species, they fundamentally lack creativity.
My gosh.
Their mech boys
orcs just find us fucking boring then.
Orc mech boy. And
they want, you know, more lights, more camera, more action,
that none of
but
them
we're
can
just,
ever tell whose stuff belongs to who. If you were to throw a whole bunch of orc guns into a pile, each of them would be able to tell immediately which one was theirs, or at least which one they liked better.
A little customization.
And then they could probably bash the true owner's teeth in and take it for themselves. Now don't get me wrong, this isn't a deal breaker for the orcs when it comes to measuring up whether a species is a good enemy or not. In fact, Humie gear is their favorite thing to loot aside from looting gear from other orcs. Humie gear is like a blank canvas.
Well, that's good.
Orcs can
I'm glad we're good for something.
And make it proper
good loot.
This normally takes the form of just gluing and welding a whole bunch of extra metal and scrap to them to make them extra killy. If, for example, beaky power claws work pretty good. They're just unoriginal. They look like a big Humie hand and don't have, you know, big metal claws on them like a proper power claw.
Yeah, no claws.
That's nothing that can't be fixed with a bit of orky ingenuity.
So they like to customize their pieces once they steal it. That's so cute.
What do the orcs think of fighting against the Humies? How do they measure up when compared to every other species? Do the orcs love it or find them annoying? Are they the orcs' preferred enemy, or does that esteemed title go to a different faction? Honestly, fighting Humies is kind of a mixed bag for the orcs. They have some qualities that make them a great proper enemy, while other things, not so much. One-on-one, a Humie doesn't even come close to an orc. They're short, squishy, soft, and most of them
they look hard as nails, the boys.
Of course, the exception of old Balei and the Beakies. They're proper hard.
Balei's badass.
Humies are also just not really built for fighting. The orcs'
commissar
head is centered down low between their shoulders in the middle of their chest, where they can keep it safe. But the Humies have their head on top of their shoulders, just waiting for it to get knocked off. That's why Humie dreadnoughts, knights, and titans look more like an orc than a Humie. If they were built like a Humie with their head on top of their shoulders, they would probably just wander around the battlefield all stupid-like until they got knocked over and killed. As I mentioned earlier in the video, Humie tech is not as good as orc tech. But the orcs
I'm
will be the
surprised
first to
about
tell
that
you
part.
It's
That's what
pretty
I-
damn
yeah.
efficient. It's good at killing, and at least
I would have
most of
thought
their
we were
guns actually
like a
sound
smarter
proper Daka.
race
Not that
compared to the
pew-pew
orcs,
stuff that the
so-
fish heads, the tinnies, and the scrawnies use.
Interesting.
Or the gross squishy things that the bug eyes fight with that aren't even actually weapons. Also, humies almost always understand proper fighting etiquette, a rarity in the grimdark future. They
Fighting
tend to show up to
etiquette?
the fight with a whole lot of boys for the orcs to crump. This is a kindness and a showing of respect that is not lost on the orcs. It's real neighborly of them, and the lads
Bug life.
appreciate it. Even if the orcs don't really differentiate much between all of the different Humie clans, they can at least recognize that certain groups of Humies utilize different tactics, strategies, and war machines, and that's something that the orcs appreciate. Every orc will tell you that variety is the spice of life when it comes to fighting,
It
and the
is.
Humies, to their credit, do a pretty good job of always keeping things interesting. With them, you never really know.
I'm
what
glad
you're
we're good
gonna
entertainment
get,
for
even
them.
if
They
some
deserve
cowardly
that.
groups of Humies like to use long-range artillery to paste all the boys before the fighting even really gets started. That, admittedly, is something they find annoying. But even still, they recognize that this is only one Humie tactic,
Not the Ted
and
meme.
having a whole lot of different ways to conduct a fight is an important trait when measuring if someone's a good enemy or not.
The Tin Boys.
What about the Necrons, or the Tin Boys as the orcs call them? Are they as good of an enemy as the Humies?
I don't think they're gonna like
certainly
them.
a lot tougher than Humies.
Yeah.
Most of them can take a hit without even flinching. And the best part about the Tinnies is that when you're done killing all of them, they'll use their reanimation protocols, stitch themselves back together,
Oh,
and stand
hell no.
back up. Then the
That's
boys
not fun
can
to
kill
fight.
them all over again.
Oh, well,
Any
maybe
orc who's
they'll
ever
like
tried
it
to
'cause they
do
get
this
to
with
do it all
Humies
again.
will tell you that it's not nearly as fun.
Yeah.
And that being said, no enemy is truly perfect, and the Tin Boys do have a few flaws.
Okay,
Although
let me
their
know.
tenaciousness is greatly appreciated, fights against them can start to feel kinda samey after a while. It all starts
Yeah.
to get a little bit dull. Most of the Tin Boys are mindless automatons that fight in complete silence. No war cries, no screams of
They
pain,
fight in
nothing to get the
silence?
blood pumping. They just don't have the passion for fighting like orcs or
What?
even some Humies do. That being said, the Tinnies do have some pretty great tech.
They're like
to boot.
dead
Sure,
inside.
their tanks might float around and their guns may not be very loud, but they're proper killy and can unleash some pretty
Proper
hilariously
killy.
devastating effects on the battlefield. The orcs will routinely do everything they can to try to loot them.
Fist bump.
Only problem is, most of the time, when they get into a fight with them, after they finish giving them a good kicking and the Tins start to run for it, they and all of their equipment starts to fade out of existence, just completely disappearing and leaving no spoils for the boys, which is real sore loser behavior. This isn't exactly widespread information,
sad.
but there are some orcs that know the secret, that the best way to start looting tinny gear is not to fight them. It's to sneak into their tombs while they're all still asleep.
Oh.
This is what the Death Skulls orcs of Zort
So they
did a
really
little
like
while
looting
ago.
as well.
Once they got inside, they proceeded to start looting like crazy.
Like they'll do that
But
and
their
not fight.
rambunctious enthusiasm unfortunately ended up triggering the tomb's reanimation protocols, and the boys soon found themselves surrounded by thousands of canoptic constructs. If
Mistakes
far
were
from being
made.
intimidated, the boys were absolutely delighted. They started scavenging and stealing like crazy.
I love the
and ended up using all of
enthusiasm.
the Tin Boy
They're
gear
like,
to cobble together
"Shit.
hordes of cyborgs
Fuck
and
it."
Orkanauts and ever more improbable super weapons, while also hijacking some Dolem gates to ferry in wave upon wave of reinforcements. By the time the fighting was done and Overlord Thamtak the Magnificent awoke to take command of his legions, he opened his eyes to the sight of an entire mob of leering mech boys standing over his sarcophagus, evil gleams in their eyes and revving power tools in their hands.
The Fish Boys.
And speaking of valuable tech and
So, got Humies, Tin Boys. Humies right now winning on every fucking level. Apart from, like, strength, I guess, against the Necrons, because you said, like, they don't even flinch. But the thing is as well, like, what I'm really liking about this video is that I'm learning a bit more about the fighting style of people. I mean, humans, we can kind of tell what they would be like already. But the Orcs, I didn't really know much about them to begin with. And the Necrons as well, like how they're silent when they're fighting. Like that's just, it's like shivers running down my spine from that. So wow, that's kind of insane for me to hear something like that. And yeah, so what are we on now? Oh, the Fish Boys, the Tau Empire. I'd like to know what they think about Fish Boys. Let's go.
those who utilize it. The Tau, or the Fish Boys, have some of the fanciest tech worth looting, and their stuff is a bit easier to figure out than the Tin Boy machines. The Orks will routinely mock the Fish Boy weapons for not looking nor sounding like proper Daka, but none will argue their effectiveness. This often makes them preferred raiding targets for the Orks from the Bad Moon clan. For example, there was a massive colony seeding ship originally known as the Hope's Light in their fishy language that was captured by Megaboss Mokrog and turned into his looted flagship, now appropriately renamed the Tau Killa. The boss has now been using this to wage unending war on the Kalshan Sept for about 200 years. So yeah, they've got some pretty good stuff to loot. But when it comes to fighting against the Fish Boys, it's ultimately a pretty frustrating affair for the Orks. You see, the thing about Fish Boys is they really don't like it when you hit them in the teeth with a choppa. So they'll do everything they can to put as much distance between themselves and the Orks
the ranged. I remember him saying at the start.
This means that almost
they're gonna hate that.
fail, the boys will suffer unprecedented losses in the initial charge, and
without even any
satisfaction of a good old-fashioned brawl with an enemy that actually hits you back when fighting against them. Now, you would think this would be something that would either cause them to change up their tactics or
it's like Mad Max
in fighting them. But it
always reminds me of Mad Max.
This is part of the
pictures
territory with the fishies. Sure, it's a bit annoying, but the delay just makes it all the more satisfying when you do finally get your hands on the gits.
My gosh, yeah. They'll be bloodthirsty at that point.
Crump for all the boys that do survive the charge. They might put too much focus in their Daka and negate the joy of variety in a fight, but at least the fishies seem enthusiastic and passionate about fighting in their own weird fishy way. The scrawnies, on the other hand, well, let's get into it.
Oh, the scrawnies. Okay, so like the boys measure basically their respect for another and like the fun that they have in fighting, like based on quite a few things. It's not just like how tough the opponent is, it's like how much they show passion in fighting as well, and also how much like loot they're gonna get. So they don't at all like the Necrons because they can't really loot them and they're just fucking boring soulless robots. And you have the fishies. They kind of think they're like, I don't know, literally like fish people, kind of not dumb, but they're just like, why you looking, why is your stuff all so silly, you know? And like, why you gotta take the fun out of war? Like, why are you taking the fun out of the fighting? We just wanna give you a good smack. You're not even giving us that. Come on now, guys. So Humies still #1, and I can't imagine the scrawnies are gonna be any better. Like, they're gonna be quite smart, I reckon. Like, we kind of obviously fight with our hand. We obviously fight with our heart on our sleeve as humans, and so do the Orks. So that's probably why I like how we're the closest to the Orks in all of this compared to everyone else in their fighting style. Oops. Let's continue.
Scrawnies and Spikies, also known as the Eldari and the Drukhari, are probably the most annoying of all enemies that the Orks routinely fight.
I can imagine.
Somehow, they manage to be even more cowardly than Humies, which in and of itself is at least impressive. For some reason that the Orks just can't wrap their heads around, the Scrawnies seem to be more afraid of dying than any other species in the entire galaxy.
I wonder why.
Something about some pink god, it doesn't matter. They don't pay too
Slaneshi,
much attention to any gods that aren't Gork or Mork, as the rest of them are just a bunch of wimps not worth thinking about.
Wow,
Besides, every Ork knows there's only two possible things that can happen when you die. Either nothing happens and then you're not bothered because there's nothing, or you go to the Great Green and meet Gork and Mork, who then subsequently reincarnate you back into the body of a new Ork, so you can go back to fighting and do it all again.
Someone please explain.
Death isn't something that the Orks are afraid of.
Not Chaos Gods, right? There's only 3 of them.
Helped, but being afraid of it just ain't logical. Also, all of the Scrawnies, be they pointy heads, clowns, or spikies, have this real undeserved arrogance about them that the Orks find off-putting. It's like they approach the galaxy as though it should automatically behave the way they want it to. And then they get
I like how even the Orks can see that and they're like, why are you being arrogant?
Just like how the Humies do things the Orks find baffling, it's much the same way with the Scrawnies, but somehow even worse. At the end of the day, for as cowardly, weak, and oftentimes stupid as Humies is, they at least kinda sorta function in a vaguely similar manner to the Orks.
Yeah, that's what I was just saying.
Being Orks. But the Scrawnies go one step further and do things that actively annoy them. They follow
Weaker
the
orcs.
same path as the tin boys and the fish heads, in that they make all of their trucks float around on grav lifts rather than being set on good old wheels and tracks. Also, if
They
their
love
guns
the
do make any
wheels.
noise,
It's
all
definitely
weird
Mad
sounds
Max.
that certainly aren't DACA. A proper gun should have enough recoil that it almost breaks your shoulder with every shot.
Love
But
it.
just
They
like
want
with
to
other
feel
species,
absolutely
every orc that's
everything.
ever fought against the scrawnies and lived long enough to have another go knows that looks can be deceiving. Just like their owners, scrawny guns are skinny, flimsy things that you could easily break over your knee without much effort. But they pack one hell of a punch.
bet they pack a
may
punch.
be weird and stupid looking, but at the end of the day, they're right killy. And from the orc's perspective, that's something you gotta respect. Now, that's mostly
Respect,
just
brother.
in theory, because when the orcs do actually get to fight against the scrawnies, and this goes doubly for the spikies, it's almost never as fun as it should be. They almost
No.
exclusively fight with hit and run.
They deserve
style
to have
tactics,
fun.
striking from the shadows, and only getting stuck in a fight they're 100% sure them and their mates can win without getting hit back. Now, sure, if a
Yeah, you'd
line
be
of
worried if
boys
they
and a
then
line of
showed up, 'cause
scrawnies
you'd be
all
like,
charged at each
shit.
other, both sides knew there was only one possible outcome,
Yeah.
and it would involve the scrawnies getting a good kicking. But scrawnies didn't fight like orcs. They were always thinking about stuff. And the spiky ones
Thinking
had
about
this
life.
annoying habit of laying traps to draw a couple of mobs off at a time and pick them off one by one, which was just rude. They didn't even give the rest of the boys a chance to get in
Wow.
on the scrap. Also, with the spikies in particular, they have this weird
Nice.
fascination with fighting things that can't or won't fight back. This
Hmm.
behavior is anathema to the orcs. It's the equivalent of
downright
shooting at rocks,
disrespectful.
which, sure enough, could be fun for at least a
When
little
in
while.
doubt,
but
shoot
the point of
rock.
the fight was the fight, where your blood was pumping and Gork and
The
Mork were
memes.
roaring in your ears. It's not fun unless the other git is looking to take your head off in return. Further, the spikies seem to take pleasure in not just killing and fighting, but actively hurting their enemies, even after the fight is done.
Yep.
Sometimes they
That's
would even try to
Slanesh.
capture their enemies, avoiding the fight altogether.
fuck are they
just
doing
so
there?
They could hurt them. Now, torture is
Aw.
something that orcs just can't wrap their heads around. Why would you waste time poking at your enemy like this when you could just move on to another one and keep fighting? No self-respecting orc would ever engage in torture, not even to their worst.
Nice to
enemy.
know.
The
I'm just gonna
very
get bonked
idea
and
makes
that's
them
it.
sick.
Not in that
Well,
way.
Unless it was funny. Then they definitely would, and have many times in the past. But that's different. So the scrawnies use tactics that aren't much fun to fight against, and since they're a dying species and all, there's not very many of them. Both things that
Okay.
don't rank highly when it comes to traits of a good enemy. So is there anything redeeming about them at all? Well, kind of. At least
Anything?
to some orcs. When it comes to looting, as I mentioned before, the orcs find the aesthetics of scrawny weaponry to be pretty off-putting, but they do
Can they not
respect
upgrade
its
it?
power.
Okay.
Likewise, they're fascinated by scrawny armor, as even though it's no
It does look
thicker
kinda
than
cool.
an orc's finger, it's capable of stopping a bullet or a choppa just as well as a hunk of
choppa.
steel as big as an orc's fist. It's way too small for the orcs to wear, though, and even if they could fit into it,
It's like
they
an
know
Irish
they'd be
orc.
the laughingstock of their mates. So if they do use it, they have to bash it into the shape of something that's at least not completely humiliating. The rest of the scrawny's gear, though, has a bunch of weird properties, like the
Okay.
ability to make portals or make things float that have no business floating. This loot is highly sought after by the mech boys, who will often pay a pretty hefty
Okay.
price in teeth for whatever boy manages to bring some in. So it at least has value in that aspect.
Alright. The bug
Now, the
eyes.
bug eyes, also known as the Tyranids, are probably about as far
Okay.
from
Looking
scrawnies
forward
as
to
you
what
can
they
get.
say about
Not only
them.
do they seem to love fighting, but there's an endless variety of different types of them. Not to mention the best part, there's a lot of them. They reproduce just as quickly, if not even faster than
Yeah,
the
they can
orcs
just kill
do.
one after the
So when
other.
the boys
Brilliant.
find the planet currently
Never
being
ending.
overrun by bug eyes, they know they're going to have more entertainment than they know what
But
to
they don't
do
have any
with. There's
weapons.
just a couple of small issues when it comes to fighting them.
Yeah.
First is that whereas the scrawnies think way too much, the bug eyes don't really think of much of anything at all. They're like big squigs in that regard to the
I just need to
orcs.
eat.
The only
That's
thing
all they
they're
think
concerned
about.
with is getting their teeth into their next meal. Now
Yummy.
sure, sometimes they may look organized and like they're working together.
The
but
hive
remember,
mind.
looks can be deceiving. All the boys gotta do is pop one of the big brain-looking bug eyes, and the rest
Oh,
of
so
them
at
go
least know that.
absolutely nuts. Which, in fairness, is always good for a laugh. The second issue that they have with them is that there's just not much they can loot from them. All of the bug eye weaponry isn't much use to an orc. They're all fleshy, rotting organs and not proper DACA.
The fuck is
Now, that being
that?
said, their teeth,
Ew.
scything talons, and chitinous armor plating can be fashioned into some pretty good gear with a little orky ingenuity. But most orcs prefer metal equipment, something the bug eyes just can't offer them. Now, of course,
Yeah.
fighting is what truly matters.
Oh,
Orc
I
would
wish there was
argue
more people
against
for them to
this,
fight like
but
the Yumis.
looting is important too. If fighting was a cake, then looting would be the frosting. And everyone knows that cakes always taste better with frosting. Unless
Fuck
it's
yeah, they do.
cheesecake, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't think there's a single orc out
Frosting
there that
on
doesn't
cheesecake,
like
though?
fighting against the bug eyes, but some orcs like it way more than all the rest. The snake bites, for example, a more primitive
yummy.
orc clan that follows what they call the old ways, enjoys the thrill of the hunt and routinely targets bug eyes and other big beasties as their preferred enemy type.
That's a big
There's
orc.
actually one tribe of snakebite orcs in particular, known as the worm killers, that have taken this to
Worm
an entirely
killers?
different level. You see, at one point, this clan was fighting against the bug eyes in some jungle on a backwater world where they discovered a big fleshy bug eye spore. They
Huh?
brought it back to their fleet and cracked it open, and out came hundreds of tiny baby bug eyes that quickly ran off in every direction. They would soon find
Doesn't
that these
sound good.
creatures grew really quickly, and they were delighted to find their cruiser in a very short period completely overrun with them.
Oh
No
dear.
sooner had they bashed one in than another would appear out of a vent or a drain. Now, eventually, the cruiser was completely infested and became the mirror image of the Tyranid-infested jungle from before.
Oh,
The
no
only
way.
orcs that ended up surviving were these snakebites, who had become
Okay.
absolute experts in hunting these beasties.
Oh, that's
Eventually,
cool,
they
actually.
managed
They're
to kill all of them,
acclimatized
and when they met up with a
in a
bunch
very
of other
terrible
orcs,
way.
they were absolutely covered from head to toe in Tyranid trophies and had taken
Ooh.
on the name Worm Killers. This experience had been so much fun for them that they decided to hunt down more of those spore pods, which they
Yeah.
would then subsequently bring to new worlds, pop them open on their surface, and then
What?
leave for a few years. Only
Don't
to
be doing
return
that,
to a
boys.
planet completely overrun
No.
by bug eyes. It was
That's fucked.
perfect. Not only were all of the humies that lived on these worlds super mad, which the worm killers found really funny, but now they had a whole new planet
Amazing.
of bug eyes to smash. Although exact numbers
Shit.
can't be confirmed, it's estimated
They had my
that the
respect
worm
till
killers
then.
have unleashed a bug eye Armageddon on dozens of worlds, ensuring that they're never far away from a good fight.
Yeah. The Beakies are the Space
Now, the
Marines now.
Beakies are probably the most classic and iconic of all of the Orcs' enemies, and it's a huge reason why they enjoy
Is this
fighting
the
against
favorite?
the Humies so much. Pretty much every major weakness that the Humies have when it comes to being a proper enemy, the Beakies have fixed. Humans, by tradition, are soft and cowardly, but
Yeah.
Beakies are proper hard. In their
Yeah.
armor, they're about on
They
par
hard.
with an Orc in terms of size, durability, and strength. And maybe not a war boss or a knob, but at least your run-of-the-mill boy. They're also far more aggressive than regular Humies, and are not prone to streaks of cowardice. Honestly, the way
Okay,
the Orcs
how much
see
respect
them,
they
the
got?
Beakies are more like them than any other living creature in the
Yeah,
entire
that's what I was
galaxy.
saying.
They're like kindred spirits,
Wow,
so to
charge.
speak.
Tactics.
The Beakies understand that a fight is something you run towards and not away from. They're tough, strong, fast, and they'll keep fighting
Yeah.
even after they've taken a good kicking.
They
Not
will.
to mention, they've got good taste in both armor and Daka. Their
Mm,
bolters
they
are
look
good
bad
and loud,
ass.
just like the Orcs' guns, and their armor is much more well-made than all of that other Humie stuff, making it some of the Orcs' favorite equipment to loot. Now, it should come as no
Oh,
surprise.
do, like,
that
any of the
have a
Orcs,
lot
like,
of
actually
respect
just
for them,
put on the
but
armor?
They're not perfect.
They'll
First
obviously,
and
like,
foremost,
tailor
there's
it,
not
but-
nearly enough of them. Somehow, they might
Mm.
even be rarer than the scrawnies. And much to
Damn.
the Orcs' disappointment, most of the time when they go to fight the Humies,
They're
there
waiting
isn't
for
even a
them.
single Beaky to bash. Second, like I mentioned earlier in the video,
'cause you're
the Orcs
killing them
don't
with the
really
Tyranids,
understand
boys.
the concept of hate. Anything they find annoying, they'll just fight. But the Beakies, on the other hand, seem to be entirely consumed by hatred for anything and everyone that isn't a Humie. Hatred drips out of every one of their pores and
Really?
motivates every action
What are
they
your thoughts
take
on
and
that?
every decision they make. Now, sure, them being so hateful it made them a bit more fun to fight, but some of the more thinky Orcs actually kind of pity them
Thinky
in a way,
Orcs?
which is another emotion the Orcs
pity
aren't
them?
used to dealing with, and they find it annoying. You see,
Why?
Beakies are so consumed by hatred and an underlying bitterness that they're robbed of the joy they should be experiencing in a fight.
Oh my
It's
gosh,
like,
this is so
dude, why are you
insightful.
so angry? We are actively engaged in the most fun thing you can possibly do, fighting. For the Orcs to think that you need to take a chill pill is at least some kind of accomplishment.
That is insane. Yeah, they're like, bruh, calm down, you're too serious.
Now, whereas the Orcs don't really think much about the different
Taking the
chapters
fighting
of
too
Space
seriously,
Marines
it's all good fun.
outside of the
It's all
different
good
color
fun.
that they paint their armor, they do at least recognize that there's at least two different types of Beakies, because the Chaos lads with the spikes have a completely different group
Oh yeah,
of mates
right.
they pal
Yeah,
around with.
chaos.
Now, all Beakies are proper hard, don't get it twisted, but the Chaos Beakies bring a lot more variety to the table when getting stuck in. Whether they be the blue weird boy beakies that cast all kinds of weird unnatural powers, the smelly green beakies that know how to take a punch,
The smelly
strange
green
pink
ones.
beakies that, if I'm just being honest, the orcs find pretty weird, or their favorite, the red beakies that
I don't
seem
wanna
to love
know.
fighting almost as much as the orcs do. The major issue with them, though, is that the Chaos Lads with the spikes do a lot of weird stuff. Not only that, they often seem to have an agenda other than just fighting. In a lot of ways,
Yeah.
they're more like regular Humies in that aspect and less like true
Kinda
beakies,
disappointing, huh?
at least as far as the orcs are concerned. When it comes to the Chaos Gods themselves, they're not really worth thinking about. Even though Khorne is absolutely obsessed with the orcs, he finds them deeply fascinating and
He's
entertaining.
obsessed.
No proper orc would ever for
Huh?
a moment consider worshipping a puny Humie god.
Oh.
Gork and Mork were the only true gods any
I hope
orc
we
would
learn.
ever associate with. Now, all that being said, in their defense, the
Oh.
Chaos Boys are probably the kings of variety when it comes to fighting. You never really know what to expect with them, and thus their fights never get dull. When dealing with the warp and
Fight
all
good.
of the strange,
Fight
unnatural
more.
things that come out of it, things routinely get pretty weird to say the least. Especially when you're dealing with the Chaos Griblies, or the demons as the Humies call them. They can show up seemingly out of thin air when you're stuck in a fight with the Chaos Lads,
Oh,
or
gosh.
even when you're out in the warp minding your own business. The orcs view the
In the
demonic
warp minding
incursions
your
of
own
Griblies
business,
onto
is
their
that a
ships
thing?
as a good bit of sport, a fun way to pass the time on long journeys. And sure, Griblies are fun enough to fight, certainly is a nice change of pace between mutinies, but no matter how brutal and vicious they are, they're ultimately just not that satisfying to kill. When the orcs crump them, they just dematerialize, disappearing as if they were made of smoke. Every orc
no
knows that
loot.
the best part of the fight is when you lop off the enemy git's head and all the blood goes gushing out. They never get that satisfying
yeah,
payoff with
that's what
the
I meant.
Griblies, which ultimately just leaves them pretty pent up and frustrated. So most of the time, after they fight them, they just go back to fighting themselves. So the Chaos Lads with the
Oh, and they
spikes have
fight
their place in the
themselves as
hierarchy of enemies,
well.
just like the
Damn.
Griblies and the rest of the species within the Milky Way. Unfortunately, though,
They're
there
so
are some
silly.
enemies that we know the orcs get stuck in with pretty frequently that have yet to be written about from their perspective, so we can only really speculate on how they feel about them. Now, hopefully when Games Workshop decides to flesh out the Leagues of Votin, or the Stunties as they used to be called in old lore by the orcs,
Saw
we'll
a
also get
sneak
a few
peek of
stories
that,
from the orcs'
actually.
perspective to see what they think about them.
Coming
Likewise,
hopefully
the
soon.
Custodians, who we can assume they would love because they're like bigger, harder beakies with way better gear to loot, would be right at the top of the list for the orcs' preferred enemies. But as of the time of this recording, we haven't gotten a book that lets us see inside of their head while they're fighting against them, which is a real shame, and it's something I hope they correct in the future. But after all this, what do you guys think? Who do you
Ooh.
think would be the orcs' favorite enemy and why? Now, personally, I'm leaning towards regular old Humies, as
Yep.
they've got the most history with them outside of the Necrons and the Eldar.
I say
but none of the
Humies.
boys today remember the war in heaven, and they don't keep written records. So, from the modern
Oh.
orcs' perspective, Humies, or more specifically,
Can they
the
read and
Beakies,
write?
are the ones that check off the most boxes when it comes to traits a good enemy should have. If you like this video and you want to see more content like it, do
I
me
liked
a
it.
favor and hit the like button.
I'm gonna
leave a
hit the like
comment,
button.
and maybe subscribe
That
to
was
the channel
amazing.
if you haven't already. And
How do I hit
share
like
this with your
button?
friends. It
Okay,
helps
after.
me out a lot, and I really appreciate
Hmm.
it. Also, sorry if I sound a little bit off in this video. I've got a wicked
Mate,
bad flu.
You don't
but
need to keep
it was the day I was supposed to
apologizing.
record, so
You
we're just
sound
making
better
our
than
way
me
through
any
it.
day of the
Also,
week.
maybe check out the other videos I've got linked here in the end screen. I just recently made one on all of the differences between psychers and sorcerers, as most people incorrectly assume
We'll
that
take
they're
a
the
look.
same
We'll take a
thing.
look.
And I also made a how-to guide on how to properly summon a demon, at least in 40K. I had to dive into some
Oh,
pretty
hell.
obscure source material for those two, so they're worth checking out if you like chaos lore. Anyways, as always, big thanks to everyone who supports all the work that I do, and I will catch you all on the next
Thank you,
one.
WesHammer. Yeah, thank you, WesHammer. That was really, really awesome. I love doing these kind of like I know people call them reactions, but I really just, I don't like calling it that. I'm just watching a video and talking about it and whatnot. It's their work. So, I mean, it is kind of reacting, but whatever. Yeah, that was as interesting as I thought it would be. It was really, really fun. I'm glad we did that. And I'm happy that Humies are the best ones to fight. Oh yeah, oh yeah. It's based on like more things than I thought. Like I thought originally that they wouldn't like fighting us because we're just kind of weak. But it's based on so much more than that. Your passion, your stuff, and like the fact that we just won't give up. Like we just keep fighting. So that was nice. I feel proud. I feel proud that we are their favorite people to kill. And yeah, WesHammer, you speak very, very fast, but every word is meaningful and it's funny, and I like the little like interludes of the memes. I love a meme. And yeah, thank you so much. I love your content, WesHammer. First video that I've watched. I will be watching more. And you guys, if you liked it, let me know your thoughts. Let me know just everything that you're thinking. Let me know. Hopefully it's Warhammer related, but you know, whatever. I'll listen. I'll read. You know, it's fine. And yeah, you know what to do. Leave a like and subscribe. Let me know you love me, because I love you back, and I will see you again for more content, whatever that may be, next time. Take it easy.